I know from the comments on my videos that guys are pretty conscious about their hairlines. And there's one key piece of misinformation that I've been seeing floating around a lot recently. That is the confusion of widow's peaks with receding hairlines and mature hairlines. I've seen online gurus saying all sorts, frankly, including widow's peaks being a sign of balding, widow's peaks and receding hairlines being the same thing, and others even trying to recommend cures for widow's peaks as if there's some sort of disease. And the thing is, people are getting a bit worried when maybe they shouldn't be. So let's break it down layer by layer. I'm going to tell you what you actually need to know and whether it's worth worrying about. So first things first, what is a widow's peak? A widow's peak is a natural projection of hair, normally towards the center of the hairline. This usually has a V-shaped structure and they vary in size from small outcrops to larger sections of the hairline. There is some disagreement about exactly what constitutes a widow's peak. Though I generally say a widow's peak is where you have that V-shape notably jutting out from the rest of your hairline. So if that V-shape wasn't there, your hairline would just have a normal shape to it. Now, a receding hairline often gets confused with a widow's peak because they can bear some visual similarities. I often see Jude Law's hairline being referred to as a widow's peak when it's clearly just a heavily receded hairline. Now, a receded hairline is usually an early sign of male pattern baldness, a genetic condition that the majority of men will experience at some point in their lifetime. The hair normally begins to recede around the temple areas, and this can vary in height. For example, David Beckham has some recession, but his sits lower down, almost towards the side of his head. As a result, the majority of his hairline is still quite strong, and he's never really confused as having a widow's peak. He's not really got that V-shape sticking out anywhere. Let's jump back to Jude Law for a minute and compare. He also has male pattern baldness, though his main point of recession sits far higher up the head, more towards the center. This leaves him with the common M-shaped recession, which is often misconstrued with having a widow's peak. Now yes, he does have that V-shape towards the center that is often associated with having a widow's peak. However, there's a couple of clear indicators that that isn't really the case here, and that this is just a receded hairline. Firstly, you've got the fact that his hairline has been moving back for years now. Pictures of this guy when he was young shows a notable progression in the balding, which indicates a strongly receding hairline. Unfortunately for Jude, it seems quite aggressive. If this was simply just a widow's peak, I'd expect the hairline to sit more around this area. There is a chance he has a combination of both, but personally, I don't see it with this one. One thing to note is that normally when you age from your teens to your 20s, your hairline will creep back a centimetre or so. This is due to age. If it retains a similar overall shape and doesn't begin to thin or move further back, then this will normally indicate just a mature hairline. This is definitely not something to worry about if you have one. Now I thought we'd whiz through a few pictures that I've seen online, so we can use some examples to try and identify what actually constitutes a widow's peak and what actually constitutes a receding hairline, so that you might be able to better identify what's actually going on your head. Each of these pictures were either labelled online as a widow's peak or a receding hairline, some correctly, some falsely. This first one was labelled as a widow's peak. Yes, this one is definitely clearly a widow's peak. That central point is as clear as day. Number 2 is also an absolute classic widow's peak right there. He seems to have no recession either. I bet that guy's hairline has barely changed since he was a kid. This one's an interesting one. This one's labelled online as a widow's peak as well, but like with Jude Law, who we mentioned earlier, I'd say this is predominantly just a receding hairline. I don't think it's a true widow's peak. Yes, it does have the middle point at the front, but based on how far that hairline is going back to either side, I'd say that the recession is what's actually induced that V-shape. He's definitely experiencing some hair loss. Oh, Leonardo, okay. This is a pretty obvious one. This is a really small widow's peak. He doesn't really have any recession on either side, and it's quite clearly jutting out from the hairline, although it's very, very small. What? This is in no way a widow's peak. In fact, there's no peak to this at all. There's no recession in his hairline or anything. Why is this labelled a widow's peak? This guy's just got a strong juvenile hairline that just goes straight across. This has just been falsely labelled. Okay, 100%, this is accurate. This one was labelled as a receding hairline, and it definitely is. It's going back significantly at the temples, the same sort of area where mine's creeping back. His seems to be a little bit worse than mine. And you can definitely see the thinning as well, because you can see through the hair straight down to the scalp in certain areas. Well done for accurately labeling that one. This next image I've seen labelled online as both. Sometimes it's just under receding hairline, other times it's just under widow's peak. More so the latter one, to be honest. I'd say, in my opinion, this is just a classic receding hairline. There really isn't that strong V-shape anywhere here. He's losing hair all across the front, but especially at those receding bits. Personally, I think that's a fairly obvious one. Oh my god, 1000%. Not a widow's peak, not a receding hairline either. This is just what we call a mature hairline. Maybe his forehead is a tiny bit bigger than when he was slightly younger. But there's no V-shape, there's no signs of recession. Yes, his hairline is a bit bumpy, you know, kind of goes in and out slightly. But that's totally normal. Not everyone out there has a super smooth hairline. Definitely not a widow's peak, and it's also nothing to worry about either. Okay, this one is definitely a widow's peak, but also it's quite heavily receded too. You'll notice it's got that really strong V-shape at the front. Some of that might be down to his hairstyle though, but then it does go back really sharply too, so I'd say this isn't just a widow's peak, I'd say this is a combination of both. His hair's going back, you know, quite low down on the sides too, which is another sign that it's receding. Looking at this one, I'm not seeing much recession. People use these headlines like receding hairline to try and get clicks because people want to look like people like Ryan Reynolds, I guess. But I'm not seeing any recession here. For the most part, this just looks like a mature hairline. Everyone's hairline will tend to go back a little bit as they age. There's nothing major at all here. He's still got a really strong hairline. I'd definitely trade my hairline with his. This one is definitely a widow's peak as it was labelled, so that's accurate. You can see that little V-shape right in the centre, and it might have a tiny bit of recession here, but nothing out of the ordinary. It's just a mature hairline with that widow's peak in the middle. Nothing to worry about. I saw this next one posted somewhere on Reddit with the dude saying that he has this massive widow's peak, like the biggest widow's peak ever. I think this is a really good example of the confusion around this topic. I think he's treating the widow's peak as if it's encapsulating the whole front of his hairline. From right back here to the front, he thinks that that is the widow's peak, when in fact, it's only that tiny bit at the front right here. This overall larger V-shape is definitely induced here by a receding hairline. When you put this image side by side with the last one, it's clear to see the difference between the two. Okay, so hopefully from some of those images, it might give you a better idea as to which hairline type you've actually got. Now, what should you do about it, and is it worth worrying or not? If you have a standard widow's peak like those ones I mentioned in those images before, honestly, I don't think there's anything to worry about. It's true that widow's peaks are quite rare in men, but I don't think they're a bad thing. In reality, no one is bothered by them, no one cares, and you shouldn't either. I've seen video tutorials of people trying to trim these or shave them off. Personally, I wouldn't advise that because you just get left with stubble. I've also seen people recommending drugs or alternative medication treatments as if this were some form of receding hairline. Like with a mature hairline, it's not the same thing as a receding hairline. So I definitely wouldn't recommend going down that route. Maybe if your widow's peak is gigantic, like vampire size, it might be worth consulting a hair specialist to see if there's anything that can be done. However, in most cases, they look fine. As you get older, you may get some of these symptoms of a receding hairline. I have a little bit right here on the sides and then also in the centre, which I'll try and show for you here. You'll notice the lack of density in these areas as they start to thin out. If your hairline looks a bit like this, or like some of the receded ones I mentioned previously, maybe you have some of this too. This is totally normal. Most people, especially men, will experience this at some point. If your hair has just moved back a bit since you're a teenager, that may just be a mature hairline. You might not get any further recession at all. It's worth keeping a track of it. If you're noticing that your hair's starting to stretch back more and more at the temples, then you may have a receding hairline. I did a video recently covering some simple tips that you can utilize to make your hairline, if it's receding, look a hell of a lot better. You can absolutely transform the look of it without having to go through any medication or anything like that, so I'll make sure I link that one in the icon above for you to watch next. Subscribe for more videos like this one. I'll see you in the next one.